Hey, Naval Base Coronado, this is your chaplain, Chaplain Ferguson Harris, and I want to speak to you today about a very important subject. I want to talk about suicide awareness and prevention. And I'll talk a little bit about stress management, but my focus is primarily on suicide prevention and awareness. Now, the reason I think it's important that we talk about this subject is because we faced a lot in 2020. We've faced, of course, this coronavirus pandemic, which has resulted in us having to social distance from not only one another, but from our family and our friends, with the schools closing, with the child care center closing. There have been various challenges, and so this is my way of checking in with you to make sure that you're okay. And I also want to give you some tools that you can use to check on others to make sure they're okay. But not only that, I'm going to give you ways to take care of yourself to ensure that you are okay as well. We talk about suicide every year, but my purpose in this is not just to get a requirement out of the way, but I really want you to listen to what I have to say today, because I want you to be able to recognize if your friends or even your family members, we have teenagers who may not be in school this year, and we know teenage suicide is a concern, so I want you to listen for your family members as well. So I'm going to list some risk factors, then I'm going to talk about some tail signs, and I'm going to talk about some what I call protective measures, ways that we as leaders can prevent our sailors from considering suicide. But we're going to also talk about some protective factors that you can implement to make sure that you are okay as well. So first, let's look at risk factors. What are some risk factors to consider? Now, I love to use acronyms so that it's easy to remember. I'm sure many of you have taken tests and you had to remember a lot of stuff, and so you use an acronym to remember. So I'm going to use the acronym SAILOR. SAILOR will help us to remember some of the risk factors that one of your sailors or you may see yourself exhibiting, and as a result, then you can go get help. Now, the first risk factor we're going to look at in the acronym SAILOR is the word SAD. A person who may be considering suicide or who is going through something very difficult, they will show it in how they look on the outside, in their facial expressions, in how they dress. Their uniform may not be well kept. They may not be well groomed. Their shoes may not be shined. They may isolate themselves from people. This can be a risk factor in terms of suicide. The second letter in the acronym SAILOR is A, which stands for alcohol abuse. A sailor who may be considering suicide may be doing so as he or she abuses alcohol. Now, why is alcohol abuse dangerous when it comes to suicide? It's dangerous because alcohol is a depressant. And so you not only feel bad about what you're going through, but alcohol actually can make you feel worse. But the second reason alcohol is a risk factor is how many of you would say that you've done more courageous things while you were under the influence of alcohol? If that is the case, suicide may be a scary thing to do sober, but if you are under the influence of alcohol and you have a lethal means to take your life, you may actually do it. So that's why alcohol is a risk factor when it comes to suicide. The I stands for isolation. A person who is depressed, usually they do not have energy to be around people. In fact, they may not even want to come to work. That's why I would recommend that as a leader, I know your sailors are quarantined, but every once in a while, I do believe you should give them a phone call, and also sometimes have them come in so that you could check on them to ensure they are okay. Because a sailor who may be considering suicide may isolate themselves. And the reason why isolation is dangerous is because there is no one around to challenge what you may be thinking. Because when a person is considering suicide, it may not be that they want to die. They simply may want the pain to go away. And as a result, they may be thinking that that is the best alternative to the pain going away. And if there's no one else around to question them thinking that way, then they may actually carry out the act. So isolation is also a risk factor. The next one in sailor is L, which stands for loss. A person who is considering suicide have usually faced some sort of loss, whether it be a personal loss in terms of their reputation, or the death of a family member, or the loss of a friend, or the loss of purpose, or the loss of familiarity because they lived in a location, now they moved. It's always attributed to some sort of loss that of course have made them depressed, and as a result of them experiencing that loss and them wanting the pain to go away, they may actually believe that suicide is a viable solution. In the acronym SAILOR, the next one is O. That stands for organized plan. A person who is considering suicide may have thought about it long enough to actually consider a plan, how they would do it. So one of the best things we can do if we think someone may be considering suicide is to ask them if they have an organized plan, to ask them if they have lethal means, if they have a gun at home, or if they have prescription drugs. For example, for teenagers at home, it is not good for teenagers to have access to lethal means. So if you have a gun at home, you should make sure that you lock that gun up. If you have prescription drugs, you should make sure you lock those away. If you have regular drugs, non-prescription drugs, you should make sure you put those away because these are usually means by which a person takes their life. So take away the lethal means. It's okay to ask your loved one, if you were going to kill yourself, how will you do it? And we will share ways in which you, as their loved one, can save their life if they tell you yes. And the R stands for rational thinking loss. And what we mean by that is a person who's considering suicide, they may feel trapped, and as a result, they may believe that suicide is the only solution to their problems. And you and I know that in our normal state, when we're not under stress, we know that suicide is not a good option. But when a person is stressed out a lot, they're going through, or they have experienced numerous losses, they may believe that suicide is a viable option. So it is our goal to let them know that life, with the application of professional and personal resources, is a better option to suicide. So that is the acronym SAILOR. It stands for SAD, it stands for alcohol abuse, it stands for isolation, it stands for loss of something, an organized plan, and rational thinking loss. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to talk about some tell signs. What are the tell signs if a person is considering suicide? The first tell sign would be they start giving things away. Another one would be they start talking about death. They have a preoccupation with death. They begin to prepare for death. There may be a change in personality. They may start voicing hopelessness. And another tell sign, which may seem strange to you, is a sudden lift in spirit. And the reason why that may be a tell sign is because the person has been experiencing pain for a long time and they have decided that they're going to do it. And so as a result, now they feel good because they know what decision they're going to make. So if you have a sailor giving away belongings, talking a lot about death, talking about his feelings in ways that concern you, then it is important that you ask that person if they are considering suicide. Okay, now let's talk about some protective measures. What can we do as leaders to ensure that our sailors are safe? I'm just going to list a few that we can do as leaders, but in that stress management area that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about ways that you as a sailor can ensure that you are okay. So here are some of the protective measures. Number one, make sure you encourage help-seeking behavior. Make sure everyone feels important in your office. Ensure access to assistance and resources. We're going to list some resources later. Also promote healthy lifestyle practices. One thing I love about the chaplain's office is many of us, we engage in exercise. I love to run. Chaplain Maestas is a CrossFit guru. RP1 Norwood, she likes to work out. RP2 Franco, he's a runner. So we all engage in some sort of healthy lifestyle practice. So we are an example to each other, but we're also an example to the limited duty personnel that we supervise. Also, another way to exhibit healthy lifestyle practices is when you're going through something challenging, you go get help yourself. There is nothing wrong with you telling your sailors that you went to see the chaplain or you went to therapy, because then it'll let them know that it's okay for them to do as well. An additional protective measure is to model and encourage effective problem-solving skills. This is us letting our sailors know how we manage money when we have challenges, how we manage relationships when they're not going well, how we manage sailors who get in trouble in our office. Do we deflate them to the point to where they feel there's no hope, or do we discipline them properly? Yes, but we ensure that they are forgiven and they have a second chance. These are things that we as leaders can do to implement protective factors for our sailors. Now, here are some protective factors that I believe that we as sailors ourselves can do, because honestly, we are responsible for ourselves. So I want to challenge you with some things so that you, for the most part, when life gets stressful, you are ready. For example, we have to make sure we're committed to self-care. That means we do our best to take care of ourselves. We take care of our relationships. We take care of our friendships. We take care of our money. We take care of our mind. Now, what are a few things we can do to ensure that we're committed to self-care? Number one is to make sure we get good sleep, to make sure that our minds are rested, so that if we are stressful, we can handle that stress because our bodies are rested. Number two is to exercise. When we exercise, our body releases stress-reducing hormones that help us. That's probably one of the primary reasons why I run, because it helps me manage stress. Another thing we can do in terms of mental health is we can learn something new, read a book, engage a hobby. These are the various things that we can do to take care of ourselves. But if we are super stressful and those things are hard to do, we can do some professional things to take care of ourselves. We can call a therapist. We can talk to a chaplain. We can remove the lethal means of possibly taking our lives if we were thinking about suicide too much. If we are prescribed medication for mental health, then we should properly take our medication. And if it's not working out, then we should call the doctors and tell them that the medication that we're taking is not working out. My point is, we are responsible for ourselves, so it's important that we are committed to self-care. Another way to be committed to self-care is to stay connected to your family and your friends, to have healthy relationships. If they're romantic relationships, make sure you pick the right person, someone who is for you and not someone who will sabotage you. If we as individuals do these things in our lives, it doesn't mean we will not experience stress, but when stress happens in our lives, we will be able to bear that stress because we have prepared for that stress. So the next thing we're going to talk about now are resources. What are some resources that will help us deal with stress? The first one is the National Suicide Hotline number. I will say that again. The National Suicide Hotline number. You could call that number 24/7 and someone will pick up the phone. Please copy this number down. Please put it in your phone, the National Suicide Hotline number. The second thing, before things spiral out of control, is Military One Source. You'll see that number as well. Did you know that you could call Military One Source and a professional, you will be allowed to talk to a professional for 13 sessions. You can go after work, you can wear civilian clothes, and the kicker is you don't even have to tell your chain of command if it's your personal business. I recommend you doing that. We get to do that for free. And an example of modeling help-seeking behavior, I will admit to you that I've actually used it. A person who is a professional, who usually gets paid $120 an hour, you can sit before them and you can just vent anything you want to vent, and they will do their best to give you life skills to help you get through what you're going through. But there are also some local resources that I will share as well. For example, 911 or NASNY's Medical or NAB's Medical or Chaplains or the Fleet and Family Service Center are also good places that you can call as well. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is, how can we help someone who is considering suicide? We use the acronym ACT, similar to SAILOR, so we can recognize the risk factors. ACT is a way for us to remember how we can help. So the A in ACT stand for ask. It is okay to ask your loved one, your teenager, your child, your spouse, if they are considering suicide. And what may shock you is they may say yes. And if they do, then you have the opportunity to save their life. So how can we do that? The C stands for care, which means we don't judge, we don't play therapist, we show them we care by what the T means, and that's treatment. So we find a way to get them help. So for example, if your friend were to tell you right now they were considering suicide, you could literally take them to Balboa, to the emergency room, and tell the person who checks you in that your friend is considering suicide, or you could check yourself in, and then you will be assessed and helped, bottom line. But say you're out in town and there's no military treatment facility around. You can literally take your friend or yourself to a local hospital, to the emergency room. Say your friend calls you from home and they've locked themselves in. You can literally call 911 and they will dispatch a law enforcement to that home, knock on that door to make sure your friend is okay, or if they're in another state. So these are various ways you can help. We are not without helping our friends if they are considering suicide. And the last thing I'll say, that if you want confidential counseling, which means no matter what you tell the individual that's helping you, they can't tell anyone else, then the chaplain office is open. We can counsel by phone, we can counsel from a distance as long as we maintain social distancing, but just know that you have chaplains here to help you. My hope is that during this stressful time, this message has helped you. God bless.